Imagine it. The pre-dawn chill of a Bristol backstreet, the air thick with the ghosts of last night's rain, and the faint, metallic tang of aerosol. It's a scent of rebellion, of creation under duress. There, on a forgotten wall of crumbling brick, scarred by time and neglect, is a new wound, a fresh vision. A new stencil has appeared overnight, a ghost image delivered in the dark. Perhaps it's a child, rendered in stark monochrome, her hand letting go of a single blood-red, heart-shaped balloon, a symbol of innocence lost, or perhaps hope released, floating away into the indifferent urban sky. Or maybe it's a rat, that recurring protagonist of the disenfranchised, wielding a paintbrush like a weapon, its small, determined form a critique of the art world and the societal structures that deem some lives vermin. The lines are sharp, the execution impossibly swift. This isn't just an image, it's an intervention, a surgical strike on the public consciousness. It demands your attention, its message a potent cocktail of satire, anger, and a profound, almost painful tenderness. Yet, the architect of this moment, the artist, remains a complete and utter phantom. This is the foundational paradox of Banksy, an artist whose presence is felt globally in the auction houses of Sotheby's and on the separation wall in Bethlehem, but whose identity is a meticulously guarded void. This is not merely street art as we have come to know it. It is a defiant act of public discourse delivered on an invisible hand. A sermon stenciled on the cathedral of the commons. The tension is palpable, a high-wire act performed between two opposing poles. On one side, you have the explosive, undeniable impact of the work itself, its ability to hijack news cycles, to reframe political debates, to become an instant icon of protest from London to New Orleans. On the other, you have the deliberate, almost sacred anonymity of its creator. This absence is not a vacuum, it is a canvas onto which we project our own narratives, our own desires for a righteous, faceless hero. The artist's silence amplifies the volume of the work. By refusing to provide a biography, a face, a personal brand, Banksy forces the conversation back to the art, to the message seared onto the concrete. The work must stand or fall on its own terms, unburdened by the cult of personality that so often consumes the contemporary art world. It's a radical proposition in our age of relentless self-documentation and influencer culture, that the most powerful statement can be made by someone who is, for all intents and purposes, no one. This anonymity is both a shield and a sword. It is a practical necessity, protecting the artist from the legal repercussions of vandalism and trespass. But more profoundly, it is a philosophical stance. It suggests that the art is not about the artist's ego, but about a shared human experience, a collective grievance, a universal truth that needs no signature to be felt. But as the years have passed, this very anonymity has become its own form of celebrity. The Dosed has become a global brand. The media's relentless speculation, the multi-million-dollar auction prices, the endless stream of coffee table books and documentaries, they all contribute to a mythology that threatens to eclipse the work itself. We are drawn to the mystery, the whodunit, as much as we are to the stenciled critiques of capitalism and state power. The artist who sought to subvert the system, ironically, become a blue-chip commodity within it. The empty space where a face should be has been filled with a legend so potent, so pervasive, that it risks becoming the very thing the art initially sought to critique, a spectacle. And so we are left standing in this damp alleyway, the smell of spray paint fading as the city awakens, caught in the crossfire of this central conflict. Does the absence of a face truly amplify the message, allowing it to speak with a purer, more universal voice? Or has the myth of the invisible artist become a celebrity cult in its own right, a fascinating distraction that ultimately blunts the sharp edges of the very critiques the art intends to ignite? Continuing that dialogue between presence and absence, we trace the shadow cast by this invisible artist, a shadow that has left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape. From that provocative question of whether myth now eclipses message, a new narrative emerges: the global, decentralized, and often obsessive pursuit of Banksy's true identity. What began as a subcultural whisper has morphed into a sprawling, multidisciplinary investigation, a digital breadcrumb trail meticulously analyzed by academics, investigative journalists, forensic scientists, and an army of online sleuths. This is no longer just art history, it's a modern detective story played out in the public square. Consider the rigorous work of forensic linguists at universities who have systematically compared the unique syntactical patterns and idiomatic phrases in Banksy's rare public statements and interviews to a database of potential candidates. Their research, published in peer-reviewed journals, often points towards a fascinating overlap with the lexicon of Robert Del Naja, the founding member of the Bristol-based trip-hop collective Massive Attack. The connection feels almost poetic, two of Bristol's most influential and politically charged cultural exports potentially being one and the same. This is where the data becomes dense, where the art of the stencil is met with the science of the algorithm. Geographical mapping, a technique once reserved for epidemiology or criminal investigation, has been applied with startling precision. Analysts have plotted the appearance of new Banksy works around the world, discovering a striking correlation with the international tour dates of Massive Attack. A new mural appears in Melbourne a day after the band plays a festival there. A series of pieces pop up in New York during their residency. Exhibition catalogs and investigative reports from journalists like Craig Williams have laid this data out in compelling, almost undeniable timelines. Then there is the more traditional journalistic pursuit, which led reporters from the Mail on Sunday to name Robin Gunningham, another Bristol native, as the prime suspect, citing interviews with former schoolmates and a photograph that allegedly captures him at work. Each theory is a thread, and when woven together, they create a complex tapestry of speculation. Is Banksy a single person, or is it a collective, a brand name for a group of artists working under a single manifesto? This latter theory would certainly explain the prolific global output and the subtle stylistic shifts observed over the decades. It transforms Banksy from a person into an idea, an open-source movement for artistic dissent. This relentless pursuit, however, has profound consequences for how we interpret the art. The game of cat and mouse is not just a sideshow, it actively shapes our engagement with the work. What does it mean if the anti-capitalist critiques that sell for millions at auction were created by an already successful and wealthy musician? Does it render the message hypocritical, or does it add a layer of sophisticated, self-aware irony? If the artist behind the powerful pieces critiquing state surveillance and racial injustice is, as many suspect, a middle-class white man, how does that alter our perception of their authenticity and right to speak on these issues? The unmasking, or even the strong suspicion of an identity, risks domesticating the art, tethering its wild, anonymous spirit to the mundane realities of a specific biography. The power of Banksy has always been its claim to a kind of universal voice, a voice from the gutter, from the margins. Attaching a name, a face, and a privileged background to that voice inevitably complicates and perhaps compromises that power. The persistent lack of definitive proof in this sense is crucial. It keeps the legend alive. It allows Banksy to remain a collective projection, a symbol of anti-establishment sentiment that we can all, in a way, claim ownership of. But this raises a deeper question about our own cultural needs. How does this ongoing game of cat and mouse, this desperate hunt for a face, shape the interpretation of the art itself? And what does it reveal about our own deep-seated, almost primal need for narrative closure? From that narrative void, from our collective cultural need for a face behind the curtain, we project ourselves forward into a speculative future, a future where the mask might finally fall. The art world holds its breath, and as we look towards 2025, the question of Banksy's identity feels less like an if and more like a when. In an era of ubiquitous surveillance, facial recognition, and digital forensics, true anonymity is a fragile, perhaps finite state. So let us imagine that moment of revelation. Whether it comes by choice, a dramatic final act, or by force through the dogged work of an investigator, the unmasking of Banksy would send seismic shockwaves through the foundations of the contemporary art world. What would be the immediate reverberations? The first casualty, or perhaps the first beneficiary, would be the market. The art market, a notoriously opaque ecosystem built on provenance, scarcity, and mythology, has a uniquely paradoxical relationship with Banksy. The sales records for authenticated works consistently shatter expectations, with pieces like Love is in the Bin, the painting that famously shredded itself moments after being sold at Sotheby's, becoming legends of art market theater. This value is driven precisely by the mystique, by the intoxicating blend of rebellion and luxury. Anonymity is Banksy's brand, the ultimate certificate of authenticity. So what happens when that brand is resolved into a person? One could argue the market would crash. The magic would dissipate, the rebellion revealed as a carefully managed performance. The works would no longer be artifacts from a living myth, but simply paintings by... The allure of the unknown, which inflates prices to stratospheric levels, would vanish. Collectors who bought into the legend might find the remaining asset, the art itself, suddenly devalued. Conversely, a more compelling argument could be made for an unprecedented market recalibration and surge. The confirmation of a definitive identity would solve the art world's biggest provenance puzzle. A whole new chapter of art history would be written overnight. Suddenly, every rumored early work, every unverified stencil could be definitively attributed. The artist, now a public figure, could participate in the creation of their own catalog raisonné. This would trigger a gold rush for newly authenticated early pieces, while the major works from the anonymous period would acquire a new, almost wholly historical significance. The artist's identity wouldn't destroy the value, it would simply transfer it from the realm of myth to the realm of documented history, a far more stable and traditionally lucrative foundation for an artist's market. Beyond the auction block, the institutional impact would be profound. Museums, from the Tate Modern to MoMA, have long grappled with how to exhibit an artist who thrives outside their hallowed walls and whose core ethos is a critique of the very institutions that now seek to canonize them. An unmasking would change the rules of engagement. It would allow for comprehensive, scholarly retrospectives, for the artist to be interviewed, to give lectures, to participate in the shaping of their own legacy in a way that is currently impossible. But would this institutional embrace be a kiss of death? Would containing Banksy within the white cube of the gallery finally neutralize the guerrilla spirit of the work? The stakes are immense, touching upon the commodification of rebellion, the future of street art, and the very definition of artistic authenticity in the 21st century. The echo of this potential revelation is a question that cuts to the heart of the entire legend. Can a revolution, once televised, named, and cataloged, ever truly retain its power? Or is the ghost's strength forever bound to the shadows from which it emerged?